So far, the nightstand legs are completed, and the top has been assembled from 3 boards joined with pocket screws and edge glued. The top was then cut to width, but left slightly oversized. A 1/2 inch trimming bit was then used to route straight, clean ends. With all 4 edges of the tabletop smooth and square, a cove bit was used to route the edge detail on the underside of the top. After routing the cove detail, the top was turned right side up and the 1/4 inch chamfer routed on the top edges. Sanding to 220 grit completes the top. The next step is to create tenons in the side, back, and top aprons. They need to be 1/4 inch wide and 5/8 inch long. For this, I'm using my table saw with a dado cutter stack. My small saw is limited to a 1/2 inch wide dado stack, so I'm machining the dados in 2 passes. The first pass removes about 3/8 of an inch from the board's end. I have a sacrificial wooden fence clamped to the saw's metal fence. After cutting one side, the board is flipped over and the other side cut. With partial tenons milled on both ends of each apron, the saw's fence is adjusted so the second pass produces tenons that are 5/8 of an inch long. If the board is perfectly flat and uniformly thick, the tenon will be perfectly centered and uniformly thick. When surfaced 4 sides lumber leaves the mill, it may be perfectly flat, but wood likes to move. The lumber I bought was very close to perfect, but slight variations in flatness and thickness result in some of the tenons not having perfectly uniform thickness over their length. Each tenon requires a little hand tool work. First, 1/4 inch is sawed from each end. This is easy and doesn't have to be super accurate. Next, since the mortises made by the router have rounded ends, I round the tenon ends to match using a sharp chisel and file. I use 120 grit sandpaper glued to wood to fine-tune the tenon's thickness. This works real well, sort of like a very wide rasp or a file with smooth edges, so there's no danger of removing any material from the tenon shoulder. The goal is tenons that fit their mortises smoothly with only hand pressure, because some room must be left for glue. The side and front aprons have a gentle curve along the bottom edge. The original plans called for tracing the curve with a fairing stick and then cutting with a bandsaw. I chose to route the curve using a pattern bit and template. I printed a template for the curve and glued it to 1/4-inch hardboard using clear water-based acrylic finish, applying the finish to both sides of the paper. This dries fast and provides a durable surface. I cut the 1/4-inch hardboard template with a jigsaw, then sanded smooth. The front apron is only 2 inches wide, so to ensure that it didn't move while routing, I placed a few dabs of hot melt glue to the underside of the apron. The glue wasn't needed for the wide aprons. 2 clamps in the template held them firmly in place. For routing, I used a 1/2 inch diameter, 1 inch long top-bearing pattern bit. I made several passes with the router to rough out most of the waste material. Perhaps the rough cuts could have been done with a jigsaw or bandsaw. This shows the final pass with the pattern bit bearing following the template, removing about 1/8 inch of material. As you can see, this produces lots of fine wood chips, so it's nice to do this outdoors. But the result is a very smooth curve that only requires a little bit of sanding. Here's one of the side aprons test fitted to the legs. I place a black mark across the joint lines as a sanity check during glue up. This is a very simple glue up, but still the glue sets up quickly and permits very little time to correct for errors, so everything needed needs to be at hand with clamps pre-adjusted. I'm using Titebond 3 for this project, which has a slightly longer open time than other glues of this type. I use a doubled over pipe cleaner to spread glue inside the narrow mortises, and a small brush to glue the tenons. All surfaces of the tenons need to be completely wet with glue. Titebond 3 glue calls for 30 minutes of clamping time and 24 hours before stressing the joint. I prefer to leave the assembly clamped for several hours. Here are the side assemblies glued to the front and back aprons. The next step will be to add drawer dividers and supports.